Alrighty, everybody, welcome to this special edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Thomas. No guest tonight. It is Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. It is 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the moment in which this podcast is being streamed live on YouTube as well as Facebook. You can also hear the Thomas Take Sports Podcast as it is available everywhere on any and all audio podcasting platforms. And wow, what a day today. Driving into the day job, you hear the news that Leslie Frazier, the longtime Buffalo Bills defensive coordinator, has decided that he's going to be taking a break. He's going to be taking the 2023-2024 season off, and that he's going to be going in a different direction for that year, as will the Bills be going in a different direction. And obviously, all day long, I knew that once I got home from the day job today, that I was going to hop on here and that I was going to be talking about this and that I was going to be giving you guys a deep thought process into this news. And there's a lot to unpack here, by the way. This isn't just a headline that you just read and then just set the newspaper down at the aisle in Wegmans or Tops. There's a lot to dive into with this storyline. And I'm going to do the best job that I can in doing my best, giving my take and my spin on things. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to Leslie Frazier for the X amount of seasons that he's been the defensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills. It wasn't all bad. It wasn't all great. But there was certainly a lot of good. There were a lot of moments where Leslie Frazier was crucial in the development and the impact that the success stories that this 4-2-5 defense has provided over the course of the last 6 and 7 years, 6 to 7 years. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, what a duo that they had been for the Buffalo Bills. Whether they continue to be a duo for the Buffalo Bills remains to be seen. But with Leslie Frazier, being that DC for the Bills these last few seasons, of course, they were successful, right? Ed Oliver had moments of success, glimpses of success. Jerry Hughes, going back to Jerry Hughes, who hasn't been on the Bills for the last couple seasons, of course. He was a revelation in Leslie Frazier's 4-2-5 defense that he was not in Rex Ryan's 4-6 defense. So going from Rex Ryan as the DC essentially to Sean McDermott / Leslie Frazier was a success more oftentimes than not, but the moments in which it was not a success were the most crucial moments that you could find yourself in a regular NFL season and or the playoffs. And if I were to just speculate, because that's the type of season that we're in right now, we're in the speculation season portion of the offseason. Free agency isn't kicked off yet. There are some guys out there, Derek Carr, that could be free to go sign with another team right now because they were cut, already. But right now, this is a point in which the offseason is speculation time. And I say that for this sole reason within this story, that I do think this was a mutual decision. I don't think that this was a decision that was solely on Leslie Frazier to walk into Sean McDermott's office and say, "Hey, Sean, I'm taking a year off." I think this was something that was known to both McDermott as well as Frazier, that Leslie needed to go in another direction as much as the Buffalo Bills needed to go in another direction. And with that comes the talking point of what's next for the Buffalo Bills given this news. Sean McDermott's the man at the top. He's the head coach. He calls the shots. This is his team just as much as it is Josh Allen's, if not more. This is Sean McDermott's team just as much as it is Brandon Beane's, if not more. This is Sean McDermott's team just as much as anybody's team but Terry Pegula. Okay? And going back to watching the film on the Bills and Bengals, or the Bills and Vikings, or the Bills and Jets first matchup, or the Bills and Miami Dolphins first matchup, all of the losses, right, that took place over the course of the 2022-2023 season, you'd find that the defense was not up to par, that the defense had crucial moments in which the defense had a lapse in judgment, whether it was the players on the field running the defense that was called or the man calling the defense. And that is a mystery. We don't know the dynamic. We can only know what's reported. We don't know the exact dynamic of how this defense has been called these last few years, why the defense has been called the way that it's been called these last few years. Is it Sean McDermott's defensive play calling more than it is Leslie Frazier's? Is it Leslie Frazier calling the defense more than it is Sean McDermott? We don't know those things, but we do know that football is a team game, and we would be silly to point the finger at one person and say that that one person is the sole reason as to why the Bills season ended prematurely this year. It's never one thing. It's a wide variety of things that led to the Bills season coming to an end, but Leslie Frazier was someone that needed to move on. And the Buffalo Bills were another factor that also needed to move on. This is mutually beneficial for both sides. The headline is that Leslie Frazier is taking a break for 2023-2024. Now, within that, is it, okay, he's taking a break from the Buffalo Bills for one season and coming back? Or is it, I'm taking a break from coaching, then I'm going to reevaluate whether I want to come back to coach at all? We don't know that. We won't know that until this next season, this upcoming season, is completely over. We won't know that until a year from now as to whether or not Leslie Frazier is coming back or not. But if it were my guess, I would be in the territory of the I think Leslie Frazier is done coaching with the Buffalo Bills. I think this is the end for Leslie Frazier as a member of the Buffalo Bills coaching staff with Sean McDermott. Too much respect for the man to fire him. Too much respect for the man to disgrace him on his way out. Too much respect for the man to make him the scapegoat, but recognizing that, hey, this isn't working out as well as it was. This is not the same situation. This is not the same scenario that it once was. And recognizing that sooner rather than later is essential to the progress of this team. Whether it's 2 steps back to take 3 steps forward, whether it's 1 step back to take 2 steps forward, however which way you want to look at it, this needed to happen. This needed to be done. And dare I say it, we don't know if Leslie Frazier or not would want to be a part of this moving forward. We don't know necessarily if Sean McDermott would want Leslie Frazier to be a part of this moving forward because of all those things that I just stated. I got a little distracted by a comment there. My apologies, but I'll get to your comments momentarily. We don't necessarily know what direction this team is going to go in. If I were to look at the situation and say if Sean McDermott recognized that Leslie Frazier needed to move on and that the Bills needed to move on from Leslie Frazier, I think Sean McDermott is more than ready and willing and able to recognize that he, in fact, McDermott that is, needs to take ownership of this team far more than what he has. And Brandon Beane also needs to take ownership of his failures as a GM. Yes, I said it, his failures as an NFL GM. Sean McDermott needs to take more ownership of his failures as a coach. And I think accountability is a word that's thrown around in plenty of organizations, whether it's a workforce, whether it's an NFL team, accountability is such a cliche word, but in fact, it's a crucial word for moving forward and learning. And Sean McDermott is always the first guy in the room to talk about learning from victory and learning from defeat, learning from failure within defeat, moments in which your decisions were what led to the failures. Your decisions were what led you to losing, which is failure in the National Football League. Losing is nothing short of a failure. The objective is to win. The objective is not to win and learn, lose and learn. You want to learn within losing, of course. The objective, more oftentimes than not, is to never lose, obviously. You want to mitigate losing as much as humanly possible in sport, right? So I think that when I look at the future, if I were to just take a look at this situation and say, well, what direction do I think that this is going to lead the Buffalo Bills? As of right now, just according to how I see it, in terms of this situation being a mutual one between Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott, I would see this situation as one that makes me believe that Sean McDermott wants to take full accountability of this defense, and he doesn't want anyone to get in between him and the defense. Doesn't want anyone to get in the way of that 4-2-5 defense being run properly, while the Bills, and especially the defensive side of the ball now, are in the greatest state of transition since the first season in which Sean McDermott took the job. Rather than going from a 4-6 to a 4-2-5, like they did in 2017, going from Rex to Sean, they're going from a 4-2-5 with an experienced variety of players that had played within the scheme multiple years to go into a 4-2-5 that you're moving pieces around. Some of those players are leaving the team, and you're having to put new players now in that position on that defense. Could be Jordan Poyer out, could be Tremaine Edmonds out. Could be a wide variety of players changing positions. They've talked about it with Christian Benford. It's all about setting yourself up for success before you expect potential failure, and being aware of what's around you and who you have on the team, and understanding that you want to transition from one phase of your team to the next, knowing full well why you're doing it and what it's going to lead to. Yeah, there's going to be some speed bumps. There's going to be some speed bumps. I've said this so many times, and I'm going to be saying it a lot during the show, I feel, during this 2023 offseason. I don't know how, in any way, shape, or form, the Buffalo Bills are better in 2023 to 2024 than what they were in 22 to 23, in 21 to 22, or in 20 to 21. The last 3 seasons, the Buffalo Bills have been the cream of the crop, the creme de la creme of the AFC. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't believe it's going to happen quite like that in 2023, 2024. There are things changing with this team on a daily basis that will impact this team. You can argue all day long till we're blue in the face. Are those reasons for the better, or are they for the worse? Well, regardless, they're happening. We don't know the result of whether it's for the better or for worse, rather. We don't know that yet. But on the surface, not good. On the surface, Jordan Poyer, longtime safety, gone. On the surface, Tremaine Edmonds, young linebacker that was groomed by the Bills to potentially play his best football on another roster, gone. Return on investment, ROI, as I like to call it. What is that for Ed Oliver? What is that for AJ Epinesa? And what is that for Boogie Basham? What are your thoughts on that? I could tell you that I've felt pretty underwhelmed by all 3 of those guys since they came to the Buffalo Bills. Moments of progress, moments of peak performance, so few and far between. Too few and far between over the course of their time here in Buffalo. But I bring you to my next point, and it's a very important one. And it's a point that is in regards to McDermott. And my biggest gripe with Sean McDermott, I'm going to call it the McD gripe. When I go back and look at these last few seasons and why I believe the Bills could have been better than what they actually were, I look at who they came up short against. The Chiefs and the Bengals. What made the Chiefs and the Bengals so dynamic in those games against Buffalo in the playoffs? They became so dynamic due to the fact that they were able to acquire young talent via draft. Cincinnati was terrible, right? They picked first overall to take Burrow. They got T. Higgins that year. The next year they get Jamar Chase. Completely changes your entire offense, completely changes your entire organization, right? With two great wide receivers and one of the best quarterbacks the NFL has to offer, right? But they plugged X's and O's on their defense. They added to their offensive line. They spent money that was money well spent. But it wasn't big money well spent. It was money well spent. Big difference. The Kansas City Chiefs went into this past season knowing that a year ago they would have to make a really big decision, a very important decision, and that decision was what they knew they were going to do all along. It wasn't really much of a decision. It was just how are they going to move on from Tyreek Hill? Not whether they were going to move on, but how are they going to move on? They were never going to give him the money that he wanted. They tried to meet him halfway, a little bit more than halfway, but Tyreek Hill wasn't budging. So they had to move on. They had to trade him. They had to get a return and say thanks, but no thanks. Thank you for the memories. Thank you for what you did for our organization, but no thanks to whether we're going to pay you or not. They get out of that situation with a bevy of picks, not having to spend the money in terms of top tier wide receiver one money to Tyreek Hill, and they're able to kind of spread that money around a little bit. Spread that money around in the sense that we're going to use that money to get a Marquez Valdez-Scantling. We're going to use that money to get a Juju Smith-Schuster. We're going to use that money to maybe extend a player here, extend a player there. And we're going to fill the holes, plug the holes that we feel like we have. 1 year later, they're Super Bowl champions. Tyreek Hill's watching the Chiefs from his couch at his home in Miami with a mediocre season from the Dolphins in spades as well. Individual success for Tyreek Hill, but obviously, which one would you rather have? A one and done playoff season, so to speak, or a Super Bowl ring on your finger? I think Tyreek Hill would probably not regret the decision that he made, and that's why he made it, and that's why he is where he is right now. I often say guys that choose the money over winning are not winners. They don't care about winning, and that's fine. If you want to go out and make the money, that's your decision. You're putting your body on the line. You want to make as much money as humanly possible while you're playing, but those aren't the guys I want on my team. I want winners. I want guys that want to be on my team, and Andy Reid moved on. Andy Reid then plugged the holes on the team with defensive players that they needed. 1 year later, they're Super Bowl champions, and they started 7 out of 11 starters, rookies, on that defense that made a major impact, almost an entire rookie secondary. George Karlaftis, Nick Bolton at linebacker. And why am I bringing this up? Why am I talking about this in comparison to the Buffalo Bills? What relevancy does this have to do with the current situation that is the Buffalo Bills? I tell you what, it has a hell of a lot to do with the situation right now as it stands with Sean McDermott and how he has ran this team in terms of choosing who to start and not to start. I go back a few years ago to this simple point. Year after year after year, I could give you the last 3 years, okay? I always go back to the fact that more than any coach that I've ever seen in recent memory, shockingly, Sean McDermott makes rookies, quote unquote, earn their way, earn the right to play on the field for the Buffalo Bills. You could be drafted in the first round like Kaiir Elam, playing in the SEC, going up against the best of the best in college football, balling out for the Florida Gators, playing as one of the best lockdown man-to-man corners in the nation, drafted in the first round because of his due diligence and his mind for football, because of the fact that he was carrying a backpack with a playbook in it. We draft this kid. He plays really well in training camp. He shows why he's a first-round draft choice. He shows why he's one of the soon-to-be elite of the elite corners in the National Football League, in my humble opinion. Plays really well in the preseason, outside of a PI penalty, but training wheels, you're learning, you're a rookie, things happen. He's benched for a few weeks during the season for Christian Benford. He's benched for Christian Benford, who was drafted in the 6th round. I got nothing against Christian Benford. I think he's a really good player. He probably will be replacing Jordan Poyer as the next starting safety of the Buffalo Bills alongside Micah Hyde. And I say probably, I'd bet money on it. I really would. And I don't bet, but I'd bet money on it. Okay? And yes, Christian Benford showed some decent things, so I'm not taking anything away from Christian Benford. But as the season wore on, once Kaiir Elam was given the opportunity back to be the CB2 to Trey White's CB1, guys, hand to God, I truly believe that Kaiir Elam was the best corner that the Buffalo Bills had last season. Come season's end, he was playing at a much higher level than Trey White. He was playing at a much higher level than Christian Benford, who got hurt because he was playing a position that he didn't belong in. Playing snaps after snap after snap, covering receiver after receiver that he should have been covering, frankly, as a corner in the National Football League, lining up against guys like Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson. No, that's not Christian Benford. But that is Kaiir Elam. The same guy that Sean McDermott said, you sit, we're going to let Christian Benford play. My next point. Why did Gabriel Davis not play for his rookie season for the first practically 5 out of 8 weeks or whatever it was in terms of starting or not starting? Until we saw this breakout towards the end of the season, we say, hey, that's the guy we drafted in the first round, in the 5th round. Why didn't he play sooner? Who was playing in his spot? A veteran wideout that signed a 1-year deal that had no tread on the tires, with all due respect, and self-admittedly had no tread on the tires in Emmanuel Sanders. So I'm not taking shots at Emmanuel Sanders. He said this, not me. He said he had very little tread on the tires when he signed with the Buffalo Bills, but he wanted to try to make an impact on one more team prior to hanging up his cleats. And unfortunately, he couldn't do it anymore. But that's the player that Sean McDermott said he should start over a rookie who is probably the best deep threat that the Buffalo Bills have had since Eric Moulds. It's not Stephon Diggs, it's Eric Moulds. It's not Stephon Diggs, rather it's Gabe Davis. So, my next point in regards to this whole McD gripe, the fact that Sean McDermott loathes starting rookies in comparison to any other coach in the National Football League. I've never seen anything like it. And the history repeats itself time and time and time again. Bringing it home. Bringing the point all the way back around. I'll give you 2 recent examples from this past season that are head-scratching, to say the least. Maybe even more head-scratching than the last 2 that I gave you. Why did James Cook not get touches early in the season, but continued to from week 10 to 17, to the tune of having one of the highest yards per carry averages in the National Football League come season's end, despite the fact that he's easily the best pass-catching running back that the Bills had had prior to trading for Nyheim Hines? He's a rookie. They trade for Naheem Hines, and Naheem Hines didn't even play running back for this team. He played kick returner. They drafted James Cook. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss were the running backs of the Buffalo Bills. James Cook was a third stringer, sprinkled in every now and again. Why did we not play? This one is one that I'll never understand. Why did we not play Khalil Shakir, who, come season's end, among rookie wideouts, had the highest percentage of routes in which he had the highest quote-unquote open rate? And I'm not a big quote-unquote analytics guy. I like analytics when it comes to baseball because it's such a statistic-laden, heavy sport. Football's different. There's a lot of physicality to the game, despite little by little how much they're taking out of it. There's a lot of factors that play within skill sets and attributes and things like that that are more based on athleticism in the trenches of a game that is a very tough game, right? Khalil Shakir was one of the best slot receivers in this past year's draft that wasn't drafted in the first or second round, that was a gem listed as a sleeper pick prior to the draft taking place last year, and the Buffalo Bills got him. Not only did they get him, they featured him early and often in preseason to the point where I thought, this guy's a fantasy football sleeper. This guy could be Josh Allen's bread and butter as a slot receiver in the National Football League right out of the gate. This guy could make a big difference on this team. Not only did he not play, because they signed Jamison Crowder, who eventually got hurt. Not only did he not play because Sean McDermott hates starting rookies, but Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane then chose to go out and sign a retired Cole Beasley and a journeyman wide receiver at that point in his career, John Brown. And with all due respect to those guys, if we couldn't win the Super Bowl with them in their prime, what makes us believe that we could win the Super Bowl with them out of their prime? And bringing it all home today, did I miss the announcement of Leslie Frazier when it happened, as it happened? I might have. Driving into work, I'm listening to some tunes, I'm cranking the music, I'm trying to get in the zone for the rest of my 10-hour day. I hear the news or I see the news on Twitter, rather, and I think, okay, I'll hop on my Facebook page, give you guys my take on it, give you guys what I think about it, and in real time, as soon as I hear the news. I love to do that. Oftentimes I'm in my car when I'm doing it. I'd like to be in here when I'm doing it, but hey, man's got to eat, right? So, and God knows I do. So, the reason I say all these things is this is a massive reason as to why the Bills are where they are right now. Bringing it all back home, what I didn't miss was the fact that all 32 teams right now are in Indianapolis, Indiana. The NFL Scouting Combine, probably one of the most overrated events that's ever existed in modern sports history, that has nothing to do with the success that a player can cultivate on an NFL field at all. Has absolutely nothing to do with it. The greatest player at his position that's ever existed, Tom Brady, looked like the worst physical peak performance level human being that's ever walked this earth in any athletic forum, and went on to have one of the greatest careers, maybe the greatest career of all time. Putting a bow on that for the folks at home. The NFL Scouting Combine is ridiculous. I've never looked into it with any credence or anything over the course of the last 15 years. And we get these interviews, though, as fans. That's why it's an event. It's an event for the NFL. It's an event for the talent in the NFL. But I click on the video that's got Sean McDermott on it. I watch Brandon Beane a little bit, but Brandon Beane's the GM. He's the business guy. Sean McDermott's the guy that's the coach of this team. He's in the locker room leading the men, leading the boys, right? And he says something to the tune of, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have the exact quote, but in terms of evaluating a player, that it takes 3 years to find out whether a player is worthy of being in this league or not. Worthy of their skill set, so to speak. It takes 3 years to gauge how great a player can be in the NFL. It didn't for the Kansas City Chiefs in terms of starting 7 out of 11 players on defense as rookies. It didn't for the Philadelphia Eagles, who drafted every piece of their offense except for a trade that acquired them A.J. Brown. Every player, top to bottom, first string, second string, third string, on that offense that led them to a NFC Championship game, winning that game against San Francisco, playing in the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. Every guy on that roster, on that offense, was drafted, except for A.J. Brown. Did it take them 3 years to find out whether those players were good enough or not? Surely doesn't seem like it. Some of those guys, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year pro, playing in their first Super Bowl, 7 out of 11 of the Kansas City Chiefs, rookies on defense, go to the team that knocked us out of the playoffs, the Cincinnati Bengals. How many players are 3 years or under on that team? One of the youngest teams in the National Football League. The fact that Sean McDermott has this thinking after losing the way that they have these last few seasons is absolutely mind-blowing. And we're getting to a point where you go back to 2017, Sean McDermott was the guy that was going to change the culture. He was the guy that was going to bring the Bills out of the abyss. He changed the culture. He brought the Bills out of the abyss. He broke the drought year one. He led the team to heights that the team had not been to in over 25 years. Literally within a generation. And yet, I believe that if things from this moment on continue down the trajectory that they are, or lack thereof, trajectory means it's going upward, right? I think this could potentially be a nosedive. And we could see this coaching staff be completely blown up in the sense from within. Right now, this could be the first moment in which, of many moments, that this staff parts ways. We've seen rumblings already. Chad Hall went from being a wide receiver coach for the Buffalo Bills to a wide receiver coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He didn't take a promotion. He took the same job with another team. Willingly just said, bye, see ya, I'm going to do the same thing that I'm doing here somewhere else. Typically, if a coach leaves one team to another, he's taking a bigger, better job. Chad Hall wasn't doing that, and maybe that was mutual. Maybe it was Sean McDermott saying, well, we feel better off going in another direction without you anyway. Maybe this one was mutual too. Maybe both of them were mutual. And if in fact they were mutual, let's just say they were and assume that they were, that puts the onus now even more on Sean McDermott to get this ship righted. To get us back, at the very least, to an AFC Championship game. And with so many factors working against the Buffalo Bills right now, in comparison to the last couple years, I doubt that will happen. And I doubt that will happen due to the fact that the coaching staff is changing. There's players coming off of this team that have been on this team for a long time. There's holes that need to be filled. And they do not have the salary cap situation to fill them. You can put out all these articles that I've seen, and shout out to all these guys. I respect them greatly. But when I look at these articles that say this is how the Bills can restructure, and the first name on that list is Josh Patrick Allen, in terms of Joshua Patrick Allen restructuring his damn contract, that blows my mind. If I was Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills asked me to restructure my contract, I'd tell them to kick rocks. Go ask somebody else. The amount of hits that this guy has taken over the course of the last 2 years, just as much as Lamar Jackson, maybe even more than Lamar Jackson. And the fact that Josh Allen's standing on his own two goddamn feet is as shocking a storyline as any in the National Football League. Praise the Lord that Josh Allen is not compensated in any way based on the amount of hits that guy has taken. Granted, this season he had the UCL injury that everyone wants to forget about. The UCL injury that I heard that he had prior to it kind of being thrown out there. And I'm saying, hey, this is a very serious injury. You don't see Josh Allen throwing the football with Jordan Palmer right now like he was last offseason. I wonder why. So I offer you guys a lot of things on this show, whether it's just my takes, my opinions, some of it, the majority of it, I think tonight especially, mixed in with facts. And wondering what's next for this team is anybody's guess. No one can say that they have a full-on ability to guess in which how this team is going to get better. Because this team is, I hate to say it, things are kind of a mess right now. And for all the reasons I stated already, but you look around the NFL, the rumblings, the stories, the AFC East is going to get better, the Dolphins are going to get better, the Jets are going to get better, the Patriots, I don't know how much better they're going to get, but it can't get much worse for them, so they can only get better. And at the very least, they fixed the offensive coordinator coaching situation. They got Bill O'Brien back. I don't know how well that's going to do, but it should do better than what it was, right? I think this team is further pushing themselves behind with their thinking. And it starts at the top. If Sean McDermott doesn't change his thinking, you might not see Sean McDermott as the head coach of this team in a couple years. Who would have thought that a year ago? Who would have thought that 2 years ago? Who would have thought that 3 years ago? Or even after year one when he led the team to breaking the playoff drought. But this is the expectation that Sean McDermott has set for the team. These are the expectations that Sean McDermott has created for the team based on their ability to win these last few seasons. And looking at the draft, we'll be talking about that a little bit more together. Me being the narrator, you being the viewer, me being the storyteller, whatever you want to call me. We'll be talking about that a lot more. And there are a lot of points to highlight in terms of the conversation right now. People saying, well, should they go out and draft an offensive lineman in the first round? Should they go out and draft a wide receiver in the first round? I tell you this, if they don't draft a wide receiver in the first or an offensive lineman in the first, and the offensive lineman is in the first round, they draft a receiver in the second, and vice versa, any combination of that, I don't care how it happens. As long as it's one of those two positions in the first 2 rounds, I'm fine. I'd go even further and say draft wide if they don't draft maybe 2 of those positions, 2 players rather, at those positions. I'd say that would be a well-advised move to go out and do that. You haven't drafted a receiver in the first round since Sammy Watkins. You haven't drafted a receiver in the second round since Zay Jones, and Josh Allen wasn't even on the team yet. So in the Josh Allen era, you haven't drafted a receiver in the first or second round, not one time. You haven't drafted an offensive lineman in the second round since Cody Ford. How'd that work out? So a lot needs to be said and a lot needs to be done. I think Bills fans right now, there's a quiet silence. You know, there is a silence, I'd say. I wouldn't even say quiet because that implies that there's chatter. There's no chatter of anything that I'm saying. I haven't seen it. And I'm not trying to say I'm holier than thou in terms of my thought process, but why is nobody else thinking this but me? Why am I the only person saying these things? I think it's some things that Bills fans are just not willing to admit right now. And that's because we're still in this grieving process of, oh, how did we lose against Cincinnati? We lost because we weren't good enough. We lost because we played with no urgency at all. And that falls on the coaches more than any player on that team. Leslie Frazier taking a break. I wish I could take a break from being a fan of this team sometimes, but wouldn't trade my Bills fandom, wouldn't trade the Bills Mafia for the world. But I did take a break from this podcast for a little bit, and it's safe to say I won't be taking a break anytime soon. Thank you for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. Greatly appreciate the comments. Sorry I couldn't get to many of them. I do see that you guys are in agreement with me so far. And, I do see that some people are saying they think, or they're asking me, what do I think as far as Frazier being fired? It was a polite way of saying thanks, but no thanks. Mutual, I think. If I were to speculate, I don't know that for sure, but I think it's very possible. In terms of who I want the Bills to go get as the next defensive coordinator, I don't think there's anyone that Sean McDermott wants as the defensive coordinator. They could put Joe Smith. They could put John Doe as the defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. It doesn't matter because Sean McDermott's calling the shots now. Does not want his season to come to an end by the hand or decisions of another coach, especially when it comes to the defense. Only when it comes to the defense. Ken Dorsey's running the show offensively, and a lot of people are giving him a lot of flack. I'll touch on this before we end things, before we part ways. Ken Dorsey's got 1 year under his belt at the job. You want to fire a coach after one season, that's a real bad look, just in general. Whether it's right to fire him, wrong to fire him, it's just a bad look. I think there's more progress to be made with a coach like Ken Dorsey than there was with a coach like Leslie Frazier. Two very different coaches at two very different points in their coaching careers. Leslie Frazier had been the DC for the Bills for a long time, had been a defensive coach in the National Football League for a long time, had been a former player, former head coach. So Ken Dorsey, a guy that Josh Allen was the first coach that Josh Allen could actually somewhat trust, even more so than the ridiculousness of what was the coach of the year, Brian Daboll, in terms of how he could ever trust Daboll more than Dorsey. That never happened. It was always Dorsey in terms of Allen's trust. From my viewpoint, one guy's in the booth, the other guy's on the sideline. Which one would you trust more? Which one would you have a better speaking correspondence with when one guy's on the sideline, the other guy you don't even see, you just hear his voice in your ear? One guy's essentially Jor-El and the other guy's Jonathan Kent, right? So, weird analogy, but I think I'm spot on with that. We know who Clark Kent is. We know who Superman is. It's Josh Allen. Right. So, a lot to be said here on this show tonight. Lot to unpack. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoy it. It's been a bit. It had been a bit since I'd been on, and I really appreciate you guys tuning in, chiming in here for over 45 minutes. Usually I like to keep it 30 to 45. We're on the 45-minute precipice here, so greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. The Bills got some work to do, and this offseason is just getting started. What's going to happen with Derek Carr? What's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers? I think both of them could very well both be in the AFC East with either the Dolphins or the Jets. Talked to a lot of Dolphins fans in regards to that. I think it's very likely that the Dolphins could end up with Derek Carr and or Aaron Rodgers. The Jets could end up with Aaron Rodgers and or Derek Carr. Either way, both of those teams get better. Do they get better than the Bills? It's up to the Bills to answer that question. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. See you next time.